Welcome, wanderer, and thank you for finding your way here tonight. Whether you are here to relax, to fall asleep, or simply to escape into another world for a while, you are truly welcome. I am grateful that you chose to spend this time with me. If at any point you enjoy this journey through history, I would truly appreciate it if you leave a like. It helps this channel grow and allows me to continue creating long, peaceful stories like this one for you. Now settle in, get comfortable, and let the world slow down. Because tonight, we travel back hundreds of years, to the coldest nights of medieval Europe. This is the story of how medieval peasants survived the coldest nights, and so much more. Chapter 1: Life at the Mercy of Winter. Winter was not just a season in the medieval world. It was a force that ruled life itself. For peasants, winter was not beautiful or peaceful. There were no warm homes glowing behind glass windows. There were no thick blankets or endless firewood. Winter meant hunger. Winter meant sickness. Winter meant death for many who were too weak, too old, or simply too unlucky. The land that had fed them in summer now turned against them. Fields froze until they became hard as stone. Wells hardened with ice so thick that buckets shattered against it. Animals grew thin as food ran low. Even the air itself felt sharp, as if it could cut into the lungs with every breath. Most peasants lived day by day, never certain if the next winter would be their last. There were no weather forecasts. No warnings of storms. Only the sky, the wind, and instincts passed down through generations. When the first frost came, everyone understood what it meant. The long fight had begun. Days became shorter. The sun disappeared early behind grey clouds. Nights grew longer and colder. Fires burned lower to save wood. The cold crept in through walls, roofs, and floors. Families gathered close not for comfort, but for survival. Even breathing felt colder in the darkness. Frost formed on blankets. Ice formed in drinking cups left untouched overnight. And yet they endured. Not because they were stronger than modern humans, but because they had no choice. Survival was not heroic. It was simply necessary. Chapter 2: The Peasant Home, Shelter Against Deathly Cold. A medieval peasant's home was not built for comfort. It was built for survival, and only just enough of it. Most homes were small, dark, and poorly sealed against the wind. The walls were made from mud mixed with straw, packed between wooden frames. This material was cheap and easy to repair, but it did little to stop the cold. Every crack in the wall became a pathway for icy air. Every storm tested whether the home would still stand in the morning. The roof was usually made of thatch, thick layers of dry grass or reeds tied tightly together. When new, it could keep out rain and snow, but over time it sagged, leaked, and allowed cold air to fall directly into the living space. Snow often melted through the roof and refroze inside the house. The floor was bare earth. In winter, it turned hard and frozen. Water spilled on it became ice. Straw was scattered across the ground to absorb moisture, animal waste, and dirt. This straw was rarely clean, and it was only changed when it became unbearable. The smell of damp earth, smoke, and unwashed bodies never truly left the home. Most houses had no chimney. Smoke from the fire filled the room before slowly escaping through holes in the roof or through the door. The air was thick and heavy. Eyes burned. Lungs struggled. But the smoke also helped keep insects away and slowed the decay of the wooden walls and roof. At night, animals were often brought inside. Cows, goats, sheep, and chickens shared the same space as the family. Their body heat added warmth to the air. Their breath mixed with the smoke and the cold. This was not kindness. This was necessity. In the deepest winter, an entire family lived, ate, slept, and survived in a single room. They slept pressed close together, layered with thin blankets, shared cloaks, and whatever cloth they owned. Privacy did not exist. Silence was rare. Warmth was never guaranteed. The home was not a place of peace. It was a fragile shelter standing between life and death. Chapter 3: Fire, Smoke, and the Heart of the House. Fire was not a comfort in the medieval world. It was life itself. Without fire, a peasant family could not cook, could not dry their clothes, could not warm their hands, and could not survive the night. Every flame mattered. Every glowing ember was guarded as if it were a living thing. Most homes had only one fire, burning in the center of the room or against a single wall. It was never allowed to fully die. At night, hot coals were buried beneath ash so that in the morning the fire could be reborn without needing to be started from nothing. Starting a fire from scratch in winter could take hours, and wasted heat meant wasted life. Firewood was precious. Peasants did not have endless forests at their disposal. They gathered fallen branches, broken sticks, and dead trees whenever they could. Even dried animal dung was collected and burned when wood was scarce. Nothing that could create heat was ever wasted. Children were often sent into the freezing woods to search for fuel, even when snow reached their knees and their fingers grew numb with cold. The smoke from the fire filled the home constantly. It stung the eyes and burned the throat. Breathing became slow and heavy. But that same smoke helped drive away insects, dried the thatched roof, and slowed the decay of the wooden beams above. The fire never truly made the entire house warm. It created only a small island of heat in the middle of the cold. Those closest to the flames sweated. Those further away shivered. Burns were common. Clothing caught fire. Hair caught fire. Children reached too close and paid the price. But a burn could heal. Freezing could not. At night, families slept in shifts around the fire. Someone always watched the embers. Someone always protected the warmth. Outside, the wind howled through frozen fields and empty forests. Inside, the fire whispered softly as it fought to stay alive. And between the wind and the flame, medieval life continued to exist. Chapter 4: Clothing made for survival. Clothing in the medieval world was not about fashion. It was about endurance. Every layer of cloth stood between fragile human skin and the merciless winter air. Most peasants owned only a few basic garments. A tunic made from rough wool. Simple trousers or a long skirt. A cloak worn over everything else. These clothes were not soft. Wool was thick, itchy, and often poorly cleaned. But wool had one powerful advantage. Even when wet, it still trapped warmth. Linen was worn underneath when possible, but in winter it offered little protection against the cold. Many peasants wore the same clothes day and night for weeks at a time. Washing garments in winter was dangerous. Wet clothing could freeze solid. A soaked tunic could become a death sentence. So dirt was tolerated. Sweat dried into fabric. Smoke settled into every fiber. The smell of the home became the smell of the clothes. Shoes were thin and made of leather with no insulation. Snow soaked through quickly. Feet went numb. Toes froze. Frostbite was common and permanent. Many peasants lost toes in winter and lived the rest of their lives with pain in every step. Hands were wrapped in scraps of cloth when gloves existed at all. Fingers cracked and bled in the cold. Scarves were rare. Hoods were pulled tight around faces. Every inch of skin that could be covered was covered. At night, peasants slept in their clothes. There were no special garments for sleeping. Cloaks doubled as blankets. Children were wrapped in whatever fabric could be spared. Sometimes several children were placed under one cloak to share warmth. Clothing was often handed down through generations. A tunic might outlive the person who first wore it. It would be patched again and again, until more patched than original cloth remained. In winter, survival did not depend on style or status. It depended on whether your clothes could trap just enough heat to keep your blood moving through the night. Chapter 5: Sleeping Through Ice and Wind. Sleep in the medieval world was not a peaceful escape from the cold. It was another battle to endure it. When night fell and the fire burned low to save fuel, the cold reclaimed the home. Breath became visible in the air. Frost crept across wooden beams and earthen floors. Blankets were few and thin, usually made from rough wool or patched scraps of cloth. Feathers were rare for peasants. Most slept on straw mattresses laid directly on the frozen ground. Over time, the straw flattened and rotted, holding dampness instead of warmth. Yet it was all they had. Families slept together in tight groups, pressed shoulder to shoulder, using shared body heat as their greatest defense. Parents wrapped children between their bodies. The weakest were placed in the middle. The strongest slept on the outside where the cold was harshest. Cloaks were pulled over heads. Arms were tucked against chests. Knees were drawn in tight to conserve warmth. Movement slowed. Stillness became survival. During the worst nights, ice formed inside the home itself. Water left in bowls froze solid before morning. Beard stiffened with frost. Hair froze to wooden walls. Waking in the night was dangerous. Leaving the warmth of the group, even for a moment, could mean never warming again. Some peasants never woke at all. Cold stole life quietly. It slowed the heart. It calmed the breath. Death came like sleep. In the morning, survivors rose stiff and aching. Fingers barely moved. Joints screamed with pain. But they rose anyway. Because sleep had not ended the struggle. It had only paused it for a few fragile hours. Chapter 6: Food that kept the body alive. Food in winter was never about pleasure. It was about survival, about keeping the body warm enough and strong enough to see another sunrise. By the time the coldest months arrived, fresh food was long gone. Fields were frozen. Gardens lay buried beneath snow. What remained was what had been saved, dried, salted, or buried deep in cellars and pits. Bread formed the heart of every meal. It was dark, dense, and heavy, made from rye, barley, or oats. Wheat bread was a luxury most peasants rarely touched. This coarse bread was hard on the teeth and slow to chew, but it filled the stomach and gave strength enough to work and endure the cold. Porridge was eaten often, made from crushed grain boiled in water. Sometimes it was flavored with a little salt. Sometimes with nothing at all. Vegetables that survived winter were few. Turnips, onions, leeks, and cabbage were stored in cool pits beneath the earth. Over time they grew soft, bitter, and weak in flavor, but they still gave life. Beans and peas were dried and soaked until they swelled again with water. Meat was rare. When it appeared, it was usually salted pork or dried fish. Fresh meat was a festival food, not a winter one. Fat was precious. It carried warmth through the body. Even a small piece of bacon added to a pot could turn thin soup into a meal that kept hands from shaking and legs from collapsing. Hunger was a constant companion. Meals were small. Many went to bed still hungry, feeling the slow ache in the stomach as they tried to sleep. During the hardest winters, stores ran out before spring arrived. People ate what they never would in warmer months. Moldy grain. Rotten vegetables. Ground bones mixed into flour. Even animals meant to pull plows were sometimes slaughtered early out of desperation. Yet food, even when scarce, was shared within the household. Parents quietly gave their portions to children. The old often ate last. In winter, every bite carried weight. Every mouthful meant one more step taken, one more night endured, one more fragile chance at survival. Chapter 7: Winter work that never stopped. Winter did not bring rest to the medieval peasant. It only changed the shape of the labor. Even when the fields lay frozen beneath snow and ice, work continued every single day. Survival demanded it. Wood had to be gathered constantly to keep the fire alive. Water had to be fetched from wells broken open through layers of ice. Animals still needed care, even when their breath froze in the air. Inside the home, grain had to be ground into flour by hand. This was slow, exhausting work that numbed the fingers and cracked the skin. Wool had to be spun into thread. Clothes had to be patched again and again to keep the cold from finding bare skin. Tools were repaired by firelight. Baskets were woven. Ropes were twisted. Nothing was wasted. Every moment of daylight was used. Outside, those strong enough cleared snow from paths and roofs. Heavy snowfall could collapse thatched homes if it was not removed. Frozen doors had to be broken open. Fences were rebuilt where winter storms had torn them apart. Some peasants traveled to forests to cut timber for lords who demanded rent even in the dead of winter. Others hunted rabbits, birds, and deer when they could, risking punishment if they were caught hunting on forbidden lands. Children worked as soon as they could walk. They carried water, gathered fuel, fed animals, and helped in every task their small bodies could manage. There was no winter break. There was no pause for the cold. The cold only made the work slower and more painful. Fingers lost feeling. Muscles stiffened. Breath burned in the chest. Yet work did not stop. Because if the work stopped, the fire stopped. And if the fire stopped, everything else soon followed. Chapter 8: Darkness, Fear, and Superstition. Winter nights in the medieval world were long, deep, and filled with fear. When the sun vanished behind grey clouds in the early afternoon, darkness took over for most of the day. Inside the home, the only light came from the fire and a few smoky oil lamps when oil could be spared. Shadows clung to every corner of the room. Outside, the world disappeared into blackness. In that darkness, imagination grew powerful. Peasants believed the winter night belonged to spirits, demons, and wandering souls. Old stories were told of creatures that walked the snow after sunset, of voices calling from the forest, of shadows that moved without bodies. The wind howling through trees became the cries of the restless dead. The creaking of frozen wood became footsteps at the door. Superstition was not entertainment. It was how people explained the fear they lived with every night. Charms were hung above doorways. Crosses were carved into beams. Salt was scattered near thresholds. Prayers were whispered into the smoke of the fire. Many believed that winter weakened the barrier between the living and the dead, that the long nights allowed dark forces to wander freely. Children listened wide-eyed to stories meant to warn them and protect them at the same time. Even adults felt fear settle into their bones as they lay awake, listening to the sounds outside. A branch snapping in the cold could feel like an intruder. A distant howl could freeze the blood in the veins. Fear kept people inside after sunset unless necessity forced them out. The darkness was not empty. It was alive with what people believed might be waiting. And in a world without streetlights, without locked doors, without any way to call for help, that fear felt completely real. Chapter 9: Children of the Cold. Children in the medieval world did not experience winter as a season of play or wonder. For them, the cold was an enemy they faced from their first breath. Many were born into unheated homes, wrapped in thin cloth, their survival uncertain from the very beginning. Their small bodies lost heat quickly. Illness took them easily. Every winter claimed countless young lives before they ever learned to speak their first full words. Those who survived early childhood learned endurance fast. There were no warm coats made for small bodies. Children wore what adults could cut down and stitch smaller. Sleeves were rolled. Cloaks dragged across frozen ground. Shoes were often too big or already worn thin by older siblings. Yet they worked. They carried firewood in arms too small to hold it properly. They fetched water from icy wells. They gathered straw and dung for fuel. They fed animals whose breath steamed in the cold air. School did not exist for most. Life itself was their teacher, and winter was its hardest lesson. At night, children slept between parents or older siblings for warmth. The smallest were placed at the center of the group, protected by layers of bodies. Cries were quieted quickly. Loud noise meant wasted breath and lost heat. Hunger shaped their memories. Meals were shared carefully. Children learned early not to waste food, not to complain, not to expect more than what was given. Play still existed, but it was rare and brief. A frozen river might become a place to slide and laugh for a short moment. Snow might be shaped into small figures before fingers grew too numb to continue. But joy always ended quickly. The cold was always waiting. Many children did not grow into adults. Those who did carried winter inside them forever, etched into their bones, their joints, their scars, and their silence. Chapter 10: Illness, Frostbite, and Death. Winter was the season when sickness ruled the medieval world. Cold weakened the body. Hunger thinned the blood. Damp homes filled with smoke damaged the lungs. Coughs echoed through villages from the first frost until spring thaw. Fevers spread easily in cramped homes where entire families shared a single room and a single breath of air. There were no doctors for most peasants. There were no medicines that could truly fight infection. Only herbs, prayers, and hope. Frostbite was a quiet destroyer. Fingers turned pale, then blue, then black. Toes stiffened and lost feeling. At first, the pain burned. Later, there was no pain at all. Some survived with lost fingers or damaged feet. Others did not survive at all. A frozen limb could poison the body from within. Many died days after the cold had already taken its part. Simple injuries became deadly in winter. A small cut could fester. An infection could spread. The immune system weakened by hunger could not fight back. Death often came slowly, over nights of fever and shivering beneath thin blankets. Funerals did not pause for winter. The ground was frozen solid. Graves were difficult to dig. Sometimes bodies were kept in sheds or barns until the earth softened enough to accept them. The living still had to work. The fire still had to be fed. Life did not stop for grief. Old age was rare. Many who reached their 40s were considered lucky. Those who reached 60 were seen as almost touched by miracle. Winter decided who stayed and who left. It did not choose by kindness. It chose by strength, by chance, and often by cruelty. Chapter 11: Village Life After Sunset. When the sun disappeared beneath the frozen horizon, village life did not end, but it changed its rhythm. Darkness arrived early in winter, often while work was still unfinished. Inside the homes, families gathered close to the fire as shadows filled every corner of the room. The outside world vanished into blackness. Paths disappeared. Fields became silent. Only the wind and distant animal cries broke the stillness. There were no streetlights. No glowing windows stretching through the night. Each house became its own small island of light in a vast sea of darkness. After sunset, movement slowed. Tasks became smaller and quieter. Wool was spun by firelight. Tools were repaired. Nets were mended. Food was prepared carefully, using what little remained. Stories were told in low voices. Some spoke of past winters. Others whispered old legends meant to explain the fear that lived beyond the door. Visiting neighbors after dark was rare and dangerous. A twisted ankle on an icy path could mean death. Losing your way in a snowstorm could mean never returning. When people did travel after sunset, they carried small torches or lanterns that barely pushed back the darkness. Inside the homes, the fire slowly faded as fuel was saved for the night ahead. Shadows grew longer. Faces disappeared into the flickering light. One by one, families settled into their places on straw beds and shared cloaks. Outside, the village fell silent beneath the stars. Inside, life whispered quietly as it prepared to endure another frozen night. Chapter 12: The Sounds of Winter Nights. Winter nights in the medieval world were never truly silent. Even when the village appeared still beneath snow and darkness, sound carried far through the frozen air. The wind was the most constant voice. It moved through bare branches with a low, aching groan. It pushed against doors and slipped through cracks in the walls with soft, whistling breaths. Sometimes it howled so loudly that it felt as if the world itself were crying in pain. Inside the homes, the fire spoke in quiet language. Logs cracked as heat split their frozen cores. Embers whispered beneath ash. Smoke shifted and sighed as it escaped through the roof. Straw beds rustled as people turned slowly in their sleep, careful not to break what little warmth they had built around themselves. The animals brought inside for warmth added their own sounds. A cow shifted its weight and exhaled a long, steaming breath. Chickens stirred softly. A goat scraped the frozen floor with a hoof. These small sounds meant life was still present, still resisting the cold. Far beyond the edge of the village, other sounds traveled through the night. Wolves called to one another across frozen fields. Their voices rose and fell in long, hollow cries that made the blood run cold. Foxes barked sharply in the distance. Owls glided unseen above snow-covered rooftops, their call sudden and haunting. For those lying awake beneath thin blankets, every sound carried meaning. A distant crack could be a tree splitting in the cold. Or it could be something moving closer. Sleep came lightly on winter nights. Ears stayed alert even when eyes were closed. Because in the medieval world, the sounds of night were never just sounds. They were warnings, reminders, and sometimes the last thing a person heard before morning came. Chapter 13: Wolves, Thieves, and Strangers. Winter stripped the land bare, and when food vanished from forests and fields, hunger drove all creatures closer to human homes. Wolves followed the edges of villages in silent shadows. They learned the paths of livestock, the weak points in fences, the hours when fires burned lowest. Their howls in the distance were not just sound. They were messages of hunger, of waiting, of patience. Peasants feared wolves not only for their strength, but for their endurance. A wolf could follow a trail for days. A wolf could survive when many humans could not. Thieves also moved more freely in winter. Desperation made criminals of the starving. Travelers passed through villages rarely, but when they did, they were watched closely. Strangers were dangerous in a world where there was no law after sunset. A knock on the door at night could mean help. It could also mean death. Most doors stayed locked once darkness fell. Inside, people froze in silence, waiting to see if the footsteps outside would pass by or stop. Fires were kept low to hide signs of life. Even breathing felt loud in the stillness. Some villages kept night watchers during the worst winters. Men took turns standing in the cold with spears or axes, eyes burning with exhaustion as they scanned the darkness. Their breath rose in white clouds. Their hands stiffened around wooden handles. A single mistake could cost many lives. Wolves, thieves, and desperate strangers were all shaped by the same enemy: hunger. In winter, hunger made beasts braver and men more dangerous. And every closed door was a fragile line drawn between survival and disaster. Chapter 14: The Role of the Church in Winter Survival. In the deepest months of winter, when hunger pressed hardest and fear settled into every home, the church stood as more than a place of prayer. For many peasants, it became the final thread of hope holding life together. The stone walls of the church were often the strongest buildings in a village. They held heat better than mud homes. They resisted wind and snow. During the coldest nights, some families gathered inside not only to pray, but simply to survive the temperature. The church offered spiritual warmth when physical warmth was scarce. Candles were lit carefully. Their small flames pushed back the darkness just enough to calm shaking hands and trembling hearts. Priests spoke of endurance, of suffering with purpose, of rewards waiting beyond this life. These words did not fill empty stomachs, but they helped people endure what they could not escape. The church also played a role in charity, though its reach was limited. In some villages, grain was stored for the poorest. Bread was sometimes shared during the harshest weeks. The sick were brought inside for care when no one else could help them. Not everyone trusted the church. Some believed priests lived warmer, fuller lives than the peasants who filled their pews. But in winter, resentment softened in the face of survival. Bells rang through frozen air to mark death, prayer, and time itself. Their sound carried across fields of snow and ice, reminding the living that they were not alone in their suffering. In a season where nature seemed cruel and unstoppable, faith offered meaning to pain and a fragile sense that winter, too, would one day end. Chapter 15: Festivals, Alcohol, and Escaping the Cold. Even in the harshest winters, when hunger pressed hard and fear lingered in every shadow, people still searched for moments to escape the cold in their minds, if not in their bodies. Winter festivals were rare sparks of warmth in a long season of endurance. These gatherings were tied to ancient traditions, religious holidays, and the rhythm of the year itself. On these nights, the fire burned a little brighter. Food was shared a little more freely. For a few precious hours, survival gave way to celebration. Alcohol played a powerful role in this escape. Ale, mead, and weak beer were common in most villages. They were safer to drink than much of the water, and they offered more than hydration. They brought warmth to the chest, loosened stiff muscles, and softened the sharp edges of fear and exhaustion. Peasants drank not to forget their lives, but to make them bearable. Music sometimes filled the air. Simple flutes, drums, and voices carried through cold streets and smoky halls. Dancing warmed frozen limbs. Laughter rose where silence usually ruled. For a short time, winter loosened its grip. But even in celebration, danger remained. Drunken falls on frozen ground could be fatal. Fights broke out where frustration had long been buried. Yet people still gathered, because joy, even risky joy, was better than despair. When the fires burned low and the music faded, the cold always returned. Cloaks were pulled tight again. Families walked home beneath frozen stars. The festival ended, but its memory carried warmth that lasted a little longer than the embers in the hearth. Chapter 16: Hunger at the End of Winter. The end of winter was often the most dangerous time of all. By then, the cold had already taken its toll, and food stores had been slowly drained day by day. What once seemed like careful preparation in autumn now revealed its limits. Cellars were nearly empty. Grain bins showed bare wood at the bottom. The last salted meats were cut into thinner and thinner slices. This period was known in many places as the hungry time. Spring had not yet arrived, but winter was no longer at its beginning. There was nothing new to harvest, and nothing left to spare. People ate slowly and quietly, aware that each meal might be smaller than the last. Soup grew thinner. Bread grew harder. Some days there was only water and a small crust to quiet the stomach. The body weakened as winter stretched on. Work became heavier on tired limbs. Illness spread more easily through starved bodies. Children cried from hunger more often. Parents learned to ignore the sound when there was nothing left to give. Desperation changed behavior. People searched the frozen ground for anything edible. Bark was stripped from trees and ground into flour. Roots were dug from beneath snow. Traps were set for animals that were rarely caught. In the worst years, families left their homes to beg in neighboring villages, though those villages were often just as hungry. Yet even in this time of scarcity, sharing still existed. Some households survived only because neighbors shared a little of what they had left. A handful of grain. A small piece of fat. A bowl of thin soup. These small gifts meant the difference between another night of survival and the end of the struggle. The hungry time tested not only the body, but the spirit. It revealed fear, but also quiet acts of courage and kindness that history often forgets. Chapter 17: Spring as a Second Birth. When spring finally arrived in the medieval world, it did not come as a sudden burst of warmth and color. It arrived slowly, almost timidly, as if the land itself was unsure whether winter would release its grip. The snow melted in narrow streams along frozen paths. Ice cracked on rivers and drifted away in silent sheets. The air softened just enough for breath to no longer sting the lungs. For peasants who had endured the long cold, spring felt less like a season and more like a second birth. Surviving winter was never guaranteed, and every spring was proof that they were still alive. The first green shoots were watched with quiet reverence. They promised food where only hunger had been. Animals grew more restless as grass returned to the fields. Milk began to flow again. Eggs returned to baskets. The body, weakened by months of scarcity, slowly remembered what strength felt like. But spring was not only relief. It was also fear. If the early crops failed, if frost returned too late, hunger would follow again. Seeds were planted with care and with prayer. Every handful of grain placed into the soil carried the hope of survival and the memory of suffering. The dead of winter were buried properly at last, now that the ground had softened. Mourning that had been delayed by frozen earth and exhaustion finally took place. Life resumed its cycle, carrying loss forward alongside renewal. Spring did not erase what winter had done. It merely allowed life to continue. And in the medieval world, that continuation was the greatest victory anyone could hope for. Chapter 18: What modern humans would not survive. If a modern human were suddenly placed into a medieval winter, survival would be far from certain. The cold alone would shock the body beyond what most people have ever experienced. There would be no central heating to escape into. No warm showers. No thick walls sealed against the wind. The cold would be constant, pressing against skin day and night without relief. Food would feel unfamiliar and insufficient. There would be no sugar, no steady protein, no endless variety. Hunger would be a daily presence, not a temporary inconvenience. Work would feel endless and unforgiving. There would be no weekends, no holidays from labor, no pause when muscles ached and joints screamed. Illness would become terrifying. A simple infection could mean death. A broken bone could mean the end of work, and the end of survival with it. Sleep would no longer be safe. Darkness would arrive early and bring fear with it. The mind, used to light and sound and constant distraction, would struggle against silence and shadow. Many modern people believe strength comes from comfort and convenience. But medieval strength was born from necessity. It was shaped by cold hands, empty stomachs, and endless repetition. It was quiet, stubborn, and uncelebrated. The truth is simple and unsettling. Most modern humans would not survive a single medieval winter, not because they are weaker in spirit, but because their world has removed the need to learn how to endure what peasants once faced every year of their lives. Chapter 19: The True Cost of One Cold Night. One cold night in the medieval world carried a cost that went far beyond discomfort. It was measured in strength lost, in hunger deepened, in fear sharpened by darkness. Each night demanded heat from a fire that had taken hours or days of labor to build. Each night demanded food that could never be replaced until spring. Each night demanded the body to spend energy simply to stay warm, even while resting. Sleep was never free. It was paid for with calories, with wood, with breath, with vulnerability. For the weak, a single cold night could push the body beyond recovery. A chill could become a fever. A fever could become death. The line between endurance and collapse was thin and invisible. Parents listened through the night for the breathing of their children. Husbands and wives felt for warmth beside them in the darkness, fearing the silence that might follow. Even when morning came, the night was not forgotten. It remained in stiff joints, in cracked skin, in coughs that would not fade. The true cost of one cold night was not only what it took in that moment, but what it weakened for every day that followed. And yet, night after night, the peasants endured. Not with bold heroism, but with quiet persistence. They paid the cost because there was no other choice. The night would come whether they were ready or not. Chapter 20, Final Reflections and Gentle Ending. As the long winter finally loosens its grip on the medieval world, what remains is not just a memory of cold, hunger, and darkness, but a quiet understanding of what it truly meant to survive. Peasants did not face winter with bravery as we imagine it today. They faced it with routine, with stubborn endurance, with small acts repeated every single day. They survived not because they were fearless, but because fear was a luxury they could not afford. They learned to read the sky, the wind, the fire, and the silence. They learned to listen to their bodies and to the fragile signs of life around them. They learned when to save, when to share, when to work, and when to rest. Winter shaped their bones, their habits, their prayers, and their stories. It took many from the world and left others forever marked by its touch. Yet each spring proved that survival was possible again. That warmth could return. That the frozen earth could soften. That life, even after so much loss, still chose to continue. Tonight, as you listen from a place of warmth and safety, the struggles of medieval peasants may feel distant and unreal. But their endurance built the world that followed them. Their quiet survival carried life forward through centuries of cold, hunger, and uncertainty. And as this journey comes to a gentle close, may their story remain not as one of suffering alone, but as one of resilience in its purest form. If you are drifting toward sleep now, let the cold nights fade behind you. Let the fire grow warm. Let the wind grow quiet. And rest, knowing that tonight, at least, you do not have to fight winter to survive. As our journey through the cold nights of the medieval world comes to an end, I want to thank you for spending this quiet time here with me. Whether you listened with curiosity, with wonder, or while drifting gently towards sleep, I am truly grateful that you chose to be here. If you enjoyed this story and found it relaxing or meaningful, I would truly appreciate a like, as it helps this channel grow and allows me to continue creating long, peaceful journeys through history for you. And if you would like to join me again for more calm stories, dark history, and distant worlds, you are always welcome to subscribe. For now, let the past fade softly into the distance. Let your thoughts slow. Let your breathing grow calm and steady. And wherever you are in this moment, may your night be warm, peaceful, and gentle. Thank you for listening.